All right. Health psychology. Physical illness, spirituality, key questions in health psych. That's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you some of the areas, and I could summarize it by putting some key questions up here. Stress is going to be a big area for those who studied. Anybody know anybody that has gone into health psychology or studied health psychology or is working in the field? No? Health psych is one of these subdisciplines of psychology, and you will find a lot of people who've gone into the medical field or into the psych field, and they still like both of those areas. Many of them end up doing health psychology. It's a cool way of working both in kind of a field of psychology and in the field of medicine. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about it. Let me ask you that, by the way, the key topic for a lot of health psychologists is stress. Why would stress be one of the key topics for somebody who's interested in the medical field or medicine in the field of psychology? Why would stress be in there?
Because stress has to do with a lot of health issues.
So is it possible that stress seems to have something to do with health, right? And that would make sense. And what way? Give me some examples, and let's talk about, yeah, sure, go ahead.
You lose sleep.
Okay, so the how you sleep, or if the role with sleep has to do a lot with when you're stressed or not stressed.
It will kill the telomeres on your DNA chain.
It will do what?
It will kill the telomeres on your DNA chain.
Okay, so there are things that stress will do physically to our bodies. So we'll talk a little bit about some specific things that it will do. Let's start with this question. Why do people get sick, and what causes illness? I put up SpongeBob here simply because there seem to be some people who respond to stressful things like him and some who respond like Squidward. Is there a difference into how people respond to stress? So let's start with this question. How many of you all would say right now you are stressed out? Let me see. Who says you're kind of stressed right now? Let's see. Oh. What does that mean that you're stressed? Tell me, when I asked the question, are you stressed, and you raised your hand, why did you raise your hand? What does that mean? How do you know you're stressed? What goes through your mind? Yeah?
A lot on your plate.
Well, okay, you're busy. So there's a lot that you have to do. So for some people, how many would say the reason you're stressed is because you have too much to do and not enough time? Let me see if that's what you have. Too much to do, not enough time. And is that why you're stressed? Give me another reason why you're stressed, why you raised your hand.
Can't relax.
Okay, you're stressed because you have too much to do and you can't, you said you can't relax. So then you're anxious, unable to turn something off your thinking, would that be it? So if you're too busy and you can't turn your thinking off and you have a lot to do, then you're going to call and label yourself stressed. Anybody else? Why you're stressed? It's probably, yeah?
Sometimes things come into your life that you can't control.
Okay, or there's things that come into your life that you can't control, right? People or things that happen that are outside of your control. That would be stressful. Anybody want to add anything else to this as to why you would say you're stressed? How many have, maybe, you don't have to raise your hand, but maybe relationship issues. Don't raise your hand. Maybe conflicts, because you could be sitting next to a person that you're in conflict with. How many would say that some of your plans for family are causing stress? Is that possible? All right. So, we're driving down the street one time. We had just gotten engaged, and so here's my wife and I were driving down the street, and I have this great night planned, and we're going to this restaurant, and it's going to be fun, and you have to be there at a certain time, and I forget why it was a special place. Well, anyway, we're driving down the street, and we get a flat tire. Did I tell you this story? No. We get a flat tire, and how would you respond if you're driving down the street and you're me Tell me what I should be feeling or going. And I know now I'm all dressed up, she's all dressed up. We don't see each other that often because we haven't lived in the same state ever until we get married. So she's up just visiting. We're going to this cool restaurant. We're driving down the street. Oh, by the way, it's snowing like crazy. And it's snowing, and there's a flat tire. Go boom, 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 like, how would some of you respond? Give me your emotions at that moment. How many would do what I did, which is to go, and get kind of mad? How many would get mad like me? Come on. Okay, for those who don't get mad, what would you do? You have a flat tire. What emotions would you feel? Like, oh, happy? What would you feel if you're not angry? Somebody give me your hand. If you didn't get angry, what would you feel? Sad? Well, you'd be sad. Like, oh, my tire just blew. And you would be sad. That's a good emotion. Well, it's not a good one, but you'd be, yeah. You what? You would just roll with it like SpongeBob. There's a song, and I wish it would play, because see, here's what happens. Ready? I'm driving down the street. It's snowing. It's cold. My tire goes boom, and I go, ah, like that. And I get out of the car, and I'm stressed out, and I look like that guy. I feel like that, and I have to go, because here's what I'm thinking. I got to go change my tire. I have to go get cold. And we're standing outside, and that's what I'm thinking to myself is, man, I got to get dirty. I'm going to be freezing. We're going to be late. This is messed up. This is bad. And here is Elisa. She gets out of the car and she goes, oh, it's so pretty out here. It's so quiet. Look at the snow. And you can see the moon. Look at that. And I'm thinking, I don't care if you could see the moon. I don't say that, but I'm thinking, she's kind of like that song that goes, this song. This is her theme song. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but this would be her theme song. It doesn't matter. If you didn't hear it, maybe you want to keep hearing it? Yes. La, 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 whatever. La, la, it doesn't matter. She's like this. This is how I'm happy. I'm fine. She's that guy. How many are that guy? How many of you are like that when stress hits or bad things? Let me see your hands. Come on, you're kind of like, you're like SpongeBob a lot. You're just kind of happy. Huh. So by the way, guess what? I listen to her and she says it's so beautiful out there, and I do, and I stop and I think to myself, how come I'm not like that? How come how many times does stress happen, and is she like this? And it does. We're driving down the street one time, and actually it was down the 91 freeway, but at the time it was the 91 parking lot. Because it's a Friday, and it's very busy, and we just have this new puppy dog, and we're kind of newly married, and it's this dog, and he drives, but he's fine, and we're going out of town for the weekend. And the only time the dog barks is if he makes eye contact with other people that he doesn't know. So we're driving down the 91 parking lot, and it's so slow that the dog looks over and sees the other cars and the people looking at him, must have saw another car, and he barks right in my ear. And he goes, woof! And it's very stressful. And I go like this. I go, you like that. To reach back to hit the dog. And the dog was quick, and he moved. And that little bubble above my wife's head was like, oh, you tried to smack our dog. What if that was our child? That's what I think her bubble says. Because it freaked me out. I was driving, you're stressed. It's like, oh, car cut me off. Oh, like that. And so I tried to say, but he barked at her, and she's like, okay, kind of like, I'm thinking, oh, why? And I said, doesn't that, so we had this long conversation, doesn't that bother you? The dog barked in your ear too. She goes, yeah, it kind of freaks me out a little bit, but I don't try and smack it. And I said, well, doesn't this get you frustrated that guy and that car and that dog and these people, doesn't that like bug you? And she goes, well, yeah, it's kind of a drag, but it doesn't make me angry. Was I born this way or made this way? Are we born? Is she born that way or made that way? Oh, by the way, just to be fair, I do most of the driving whenever we're together. I don't know why, I just tend to drive. And so, but one time or a few times, when she's driving the car, and we ran into traffic on the freeway, and now this person cuts her off, and she's like, "Mama," super car, and I went, "Oh, so you do get frustrated." He goes, "Yeah, but look at that car." I said, "Huh." And she looked at me like, "How come you're not?" Like, is there something different about driving versus being a passenger? We took 2 rats, these little tiny furry animals. We took a shock generator and we hooked, not me, other psychologists did. They took a shock generator and they hooked it up to the tail of the rat. And they shocked it. Side by side, both rats hooked up at the same time. And they each got shocks at indiscriminate, random times, and those rats developed stomach ulcers because of the stress. They tried doing it to humans, but ethically you can't shock humans randomly to see if they get stomach ulcers. So they used rats. And then they did something very interesting to these rats. They found out when they hooked them up to the shock generator that one key change to the experiment changed everything about the rat's experience to being shocked. What do you think they did to one rat in particular so that these shocks would come on? Oh, by the way, I'll give you kind of a hint. A light would turn on, which would tell the rats, "Oh, I'm about to get shocked," in a different experiment so that they could predict it. So you're sitting there, first of all, in the first experiment, they shocked them, and they ran them, and they didn't like that. It stressed them out. So eventually, they turned a light on that said, well, as soon as this light, in essence, they told the rat, this light's going to turn on in 4 seconds, 3 seconds later, you're going to get shocked. And they did. But you see, that helped the rats a little bit because they could predict it. Do you like to have predictions of when you're going to get shocked? Would that be better to be able to predict it? Or would you rather just be sitting like, I don't know what's going to happen, and you get shocked? Or would you like to go, oh, okay, I know I'm going to get 4, 3, 2, 1, yeah. Would it be better to predict it?
Yes.
For most people, it was. But they did one more thing to these rats, and they called one rat the executive rat and one rat the control rat. And what they did different was they gave the executive rat a little wheel right in front of his cage. And as soon as the light turned on, he had 4 seconds to go over and turn the wheel. And if he turned the wheel, no shock. The other rat was called the non-executive. He didn't have control. He was the non-control rat. But what that rat did was hooked up. We called it yoked control. So he was yoked, had the same shock generator to his tail as that guy's tail, but this light would turn on, executive rat could move the thing, and both of them, it would turn the shock off for both rats. Does that make sense? Both rats, light turns on. Executive turns it off, nobody gets shocked. One rat still, in this experiment, developed stomach ulcers. Which rat? The executive rat, who had to go over as soon as the light turned on and turn off the wheel. By the way, if the light turned on and he didn't go turn the wheel, both rats would get shocked. Both would then develop stomach ulcers. But in the experiment that I'm describing, the light would turn on, the executive rat would invariably go over, flip this, do this like that, and the control rat was just sitting there the whole time going, turn the wheel. He didn't have any control. He was completely yoked with that guy. Make sense? Who developed the ulcers? Tell me why. Raise your hand. Somebody tell me why. Which of the two rats and why?
The executive rat, because he had the stress of going to turn the wheel.
How many think the executive rat, because all of a sudden now, here comes the light, he's got the wheel, he's got the pressure, he's got to go make the decision and do the actions, and he turned it off, and if he turned it off, fine. By the way, it's a she each time, but she turns it off, and then they neither get shocked. How many think that's the executive person kind of that would probably develop the stomach ulcers over that? How many think something are the opposite, and why? Anybody else want to argue the other one? Yeah. The person who got the ulcers was the non-executive rat. Every time. The executive rat didn't get any ulcers whatsoever, because why? The stress was both predictable and controllable. And we find, ready for this, the exact same thing happens with people who have both predictability and control. It's changed the way we work now, oftentimes in homes for people that are put in homes that have let's say they're in older homes that people there are maybe living in retirement centers, or even placed there in homes in which they have more things going on and activities. People were finding that certain things were stressful. Not having predictability or control over the schedule was stressful. And this study led them to change some of the ways they dealt with people who were struggling. Let's say in some of these they were dealing with Alzheimer's or other kinds of issues in these homes. And this study helped them realize we need to give them more control. Because they used to do things like this. They used to have college students come visit. There's homes not far from here, college students will go, and by the way, the people in these homes would go like this. That's wonderful. We loved having college students come by, it's great. It had a very positive influence on their health, in fact. But it had even greater effect when they could predict it. That is, they were told, oh, by the way, college students are coming by Friday at 4 o'clock. They go, oh, good, I can get ready. But the people who had the greatest health benefits were those who could control it. And the way they did this was they gave many of them the opportunity to say, I'll tell you what, we're going to have college students come by. You get to pick the day and time for them to come visit. So they had the predictability and the control, and the health benefits were massive. These rats that weren't in control sat there and were in stressed situations that they weren't able to control, and they were completely dependent on this other person, and some of you find those very same things very, very stressful. Now it's counterintuitive to maybe the car driving situation. But in reality, oftentimes when you're in the car and you're not in control, do you ever find yourself like in the passenger seat trying to drive or trying to put on the brakes? It's like, did you not see that? It freaks you out, right? So oftentimes in normal driving situations, some of you are very bad passengers. You're like, you drive bad, I don't like being here, because you're not in control. Ultimately, at the end of the day, these executive rats were fine. Light turned on, they went and moved the wheel, no stomach ulcers, but the control rats, the non-executives still did. Fascinating studies. This is about why do people get stressed? What in fact, and then why does stress cause, let me ask you, physically, when some of you said you were stressed, physically tell me what happens when you're stressed. How do you know? What happens when you get stressed out? Did you say?
Tense muscles.
Tense muscles. How many say your muscles get tense? And then tell me specifically which muscles. Jaw, neck. How many get neck muscles? Neck, any lower back. Okay. Anything else? Other physical things when you get stressed out and you know it? Headache. How many say your head you definitely get headaches? All right. Others?
Shortness of breath.
Shortness of breath. You get anxious. Anything else? Digestive foods can be difficult. Digesting foods could be difficult. Anything else?
You feel cold.
Maybe feel cold or clammy, or palms might sweat if it's really stressful. Your heart rate goes up. I told you the story of testing heart rates in here, right? Remember that? When the person hooked me up to the polygraph machine, and they tested, and he tried to get me to change, and you could hear your heart rate when you get stressed. I tell you that story? Mm-hmm. I think you remember that, and my heart rate, I finally got it, and then the galvanic skin response, and it, but stress you out, say something, and it makes you stressed, it can go up real quickly because there's physiological responses that our bodies have. So all that introduction is to say how psychologists study the influence of stress on our bodies, our thinking, and our key variables are predictability and control. But that's just some of the things they have found. Some events, you don't have to write these down, but some events cause people to have a lot of, can cause a lot of illnesses simply because they respond in a different way to some of these events. And they cause, so you could actually add up points. If you've experienced any of these in the previous year, you get that point. And so you start adding these up, so you have trouble with in-laws, you have, you begin or end school, you get 26 points, and you add up all these life change units. Change in school, almost all of you have that. Change in residence, change in recreation, change in church activity. So you would add up 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, whatever. An event, Christmas, gets 12. At the end of the day, if you have 300 points or higher, you are what we call in a high-risk category of becoming ill in the near future. If you have low, you have a low to moderate chance of becoming ill. Now that sounds kind of, it's not the most scientific, and it's just kind of a quick gauge, but people respond differently to these events called the social readjustment rating scale, and these different life events have a different impact on them. Different people depending upon maybe some personality issues, some ways in which they view stress. So, the next question, besides what causes some people to get sick, which could be a lot of stressful events, and what causes illness, is another one. What is health? How do people respond, and what does it mean to be healthy? We're going to talk real quickly in here about what role do thoughts and spiritual beliefs play. Do you think spirituality plays a role in how we respond to stressful things? Is there a way in which some of these very stressful things that happen to all of us can be moderated by the way we think or the things that we believe? By the way, guess what? One of the key moderating variables in the field of health psychology, in the field of how people respond to illness, is the thoughts or the beliefs that we have, and religiosity and spirituality play a very big role as moderating variables, and we'll talk about those. And then next question, how bad is stress? Is it really bad for us to be stressed out all the time? And what role does things like anger, smoking, or overeating have to play with this? And then emotions, we've been talking about, most of you can tell when you're anxious, it shows up in your body. So these are just some of the questions. Do you have any questions that you want to make sure we address in the next maybe half hour as we go through? Yeah.
I asked this earlier on this semester. Does it affect your thinking and memorization?
Yeah. Does being stressed, is that the question? Is specifically on stress? Does it affect your thinking or even your ability to remember things? And high levels of stress have a huge impact on our things like memory. That's why stressful events can sometimes be forgotten. Like in traumatic events, car accidents, there are times in which we might not remember pieces. The brain seems to try and protect itself during trauma and high stress events and may block out the forming of certain new memories. Yeah.
I know that with people with thyroid problems, that one of the biggest things is anxiety and stress that they get. And so then as a result, they lose a lot of memory.
Yeah, so there's connections physically between people who might even be dealing with thyroid problems or issues, and then stress impacts that, and then memories can be impacted. You don't have to write this down, but a very interesting quote: what happens in the mind of a man is always reflected in the disease of his body. Do you guys believe that? What happens in the mind of a man is always reflected in the disease of his body. What do you think about that? Does what we think, how we think, will my wife be different because she doesn't get angry at things that happen like I do? By the way, this is a really interesting thing. My dad was just like this. And I'm learning so much. Early on, when, like, let's say when our kids were little, somebody would knock over milk and it would be spilled. My first reaction would be go like this. You're sitting there and the milk spills, I go, ah, like that. That's how I respond. I go, yeah, like that. I don't know why. That's just how I respond. And now I've learned to go like that and hold it kind of back a little bit. And when the milk spills, Elisa goes like this, huh? And she gets up, I go, don't you ever just go, huh, like that? And she goes, no, I don't. And I'm learning more and more, these responses come into play. The question is, will it have an impact in the future on our bodies? Health psychology tries to answer the very question of the role the psychological and the emotional, the role it has on our bodies. The psychosocial certainly play a role. I have learned over the years to be a lot less reactive, to try and not respond as quickly, and I'm learning there's some benefits to doing that. It's hard, but there is some role that I know these factors play in the prevention of illness, and that it's got to have some impact when we get anxious or stressed or worried. So that's ultimately, at the end of the day, what health psychology is. It's concerned with these psychosocial factors and how those promote or maintain health or prevent or help us prevent or treat illness. All right, questions? Health psychology? Yeah?
So earlier you asked the question, is it something I was born with or is it
Yep.
circumstance? Which one is it?
At the end of the day, what we're finding, and to try and to simplify the answer by saying most of us have reactions to stressful events or surprise situations that seem pretty genetic built in, but there's a whole lot of learning that goes on with that.
So it's kind of both.
And it's kind of both. And I've learned over time that my responses now, if something was to spill or fall, my reaction is completely different than it was 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's because you start to kind of unlearn some things that you maybe learned. So it's kind of both. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I could think of you could think of how many different situations or times in which you actually think more clearly during a stressful situation, right? You focus on the issue at hand much more, whether it's sports or military, right? Would you say stress can be a good thing? It wouldn't be that good if you're getting shot to not be very stressed about it, right? You're about to get shot. Like, I should be thinking more carefully and thoughtfully and pointedly. And so we're going to talk about why stress is not always that bad. It just depends on the level and how long. Okay. Let's ask another question. Any of you all done any genealogical research on your great-grandparents or grandparents? And any of you all know, if this was 100 years ago, when your great-grandparents were alive, any of them know how they died? Any of you all know how some great-grandparents or people way back 100 years ago, how they died?
My grandpa died of cancer.
Cancer. All right. Grandfather.
My grandfather died of
Diabetes.
diabetes.
Mine just died in his sleep at an old age.
Died of old age in their sleep. All right. Anybody gone back in history and looked or seen? It's not oftentimes these records aren't always kept, but people knew, and we know today, if we were to ask this question, what are you going to most likely, for those that are now 18, 19, and 20, if you live a long life, what are you most likely going to die from? And then let's take the question this way. 100 years ago, this university was founded in 1908. If this was the first class at this university in 1908, and I asked the question, what are people like you going to die from? What would be the answer? At that time in 1908, what was the number one cause of death in 1908, around the turn of the previous century? What are people dying from? They're dying from physical illnesses that were more what we call biological, probably. Not always, but a good percentage of the people in 1908 were going to die from a biological phenomenon. That's called the traditional view of illness. And that traditional view simply says that there is some sort of contagious disease that we spread in germs, or we catch bacteria or viruses, and there weren't a whole lot of treatments for them. And so if the best prevention was to avoid somebody that was contagious. So the leading cause of death in 1908 was what? Give me the 5 leading causes of death then. What was one? Influenza. How many think that one is a big one? Influenza. By the way, there were lots of sleeping sicknesses that were related to this, or even just death from influenza viruses and bugs. And the pneumonia influenza was probably one of the biggest killers. Polio was big, and it had, I don't know how big it was on there, but it's probably in my top 5. Tuberculosis, were you going to say it? Or you have another one? Yeah, no worries. Diarrhea, heart disease, and stroke. This is what great-grandparents and the generations back then were going to die from. They were just simply, and many of these, pneumonia, influenza, TB, diarrhea, many of those were contagious. People caught it and gave it to somebody else, and there weren't a lot of treatments, and that's what they... Are you going to die from these things today? Which of these on the list are you going to die from first? Number 1 cause is not contagious. The 5 leading causes of death today are what we call chronic. And chronic is different than contagious. Chronic is something that means there's a chronic cause, if you want, like heart disease. And what's interesting is that our behaviors, ready? Your behavior right now and today influences chronic disease. Me getting quickly angry at things, or not angry, but kind of, could partially lead to struggles with chronic diseases like heart disease and cancer, stroke, respiratory diseases. And by the way, auto accidents are also now one of the 5 leading causes of death. In fact, they are the leading cause of death for anybody your age, most of y'all 18. For anybody 18 to 22, it's the leading cause of death are unintentional injuries like automobiles. But if you live a longer life, you're more likely to suffer from a chronic disease today than you would from. It doesn't mean that there aren't contagious diseases. They're still out there, but they're just not as important and impactful anymore. So, all right, questions about this? This is, the key point is this, ready? Chronic diseases are those diseases that we believe there are a lot of factors of behaviors that people can change that can influence their health and their likelihood of dying. So I don't know in the future what this number will be, but my guess is chronic diseases will continue to play a huge role. People's behavior. My dad, for example, was a smoker. He smoked, 2-3 packs of cigarettes every day, which is a lot of cigarettes, if you can imagine that. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what he died from, was heart disease. Is it possible that there are behaviors that we do that will influence or change this? And the answer is that's exactly the point of health psychology. There are certain behaviors that influence chronic diseases that are both biological, psychological, and social cultural factors that feed into these. So ultimately, the view of diseases has shifted over the last 40, 50 years such that it's now become very critical to watch how our behaviors are influencing and how we think, and cultural variables are influencing the diseases that we experience. All right, questions about any of this? We're going to look at, real quickly, I want to bring up some of the role people have asked about in the past. What role does spirituality play in our managing or dealing with illness? And people have asked a question like this for a long time because it seems like there's some effect and some results that are interesting. And so let's ask the question, what's the role of spirituality and faith? And does being religious have any physical benefit? Anybody want to argue why? Do you think being religious might have some physical benefits for people that might be suffering from illnesses? What could be?
Well, to go back on the thing with not control, but it was the other one, like you can
Predictability.
I mean, like maybe for death or whatever, like someone knows or they think they know what's going to happen after death.
Maybe this idea of what happens after death isn't as scary or bad or difficult because they have a sense of eternity, let's say. Is that the idea? Uh-huh. Yeah.
Realizing that God's in complete control and He's faithful.
Does knowing that God is in control and believing He is bring extra peace? That seems pretty good.
We have like scripture as proof, like so like we not just like by word of mouth, but like we see that it's worked since like ancient times, so
All right.
it can still work the same today.
All right, so we see evidence of this not only just in what people have said, but in the Bible is clear about this role and connection. Good, yeah.
We have a holistic faith, so we treat every part of a human being from their body to their mind and their soul.
So there's this holistic way of looking at life that spirituality allows, or being, right? I mean, in other words, we can look at life through it's more than just simply physical. There's a spiritual element and a psychological and a social, right? And it's all combined in a holistic way. By the way, there is a strong correlation between faith and health. And this is what research has shown by people studying this. This correlation between faith and health is pretty cool. That religious attendance seems to predict better health and a lower risk of death in any given year. It's a correlation, but it's a fascinating correlation that some researchers are going, why is that? Why is it that people who tend to attend religious events more than once a week, why are they at lower risk for death in any given year? Well, what would you think? Yeah. Oh, maybe there are some behavioral things they do differently. If they go to church maybe on a regular basis, maybe they have other things that they're not doing, like drinking as much, let's say alcohol. Alcohol could be a very big cause, and so, right? Is that what you, yeah. What else? Why would doing something like religious attendance have maybe a lower risk of death?
Maybe knowing that you're putting your faith on God and become less stressful about situations.
Maybe having a belief in God leads to, what was the word? Maybe just simply,
Less stress.
yeah, less stress, less anxiety. So maybe someone said healthier behaviors, right? And that's what they're speculating, by the way. There might just overall be more healthy behaviors at people who tend to go to religious events or attend certain, let's say, churches or wherever, might be able to be connected to some healthier behaviors that they have. Some say it has something to do with the social support that they're getting. People that have high religious attendance are probably able to take advantage of community types of things, greater kind of like extended, almost like community family churches or marriage support. Someone mentioned in here positive kind of worldviews. There's an optimism or hope that might mediate or lead to some of these correlations. All right. Anything else? Yeah.
When you say religious, do you just mean Western Christian?
They've actually tried to answer that question because I left it pretty broad, religious, because the researchers are saying, well, we just want to find people that are religious, whatever kind of, wherever they're going, if they're more involved. And certainly the research in parts of, it just depends on which area they're studying. And so they find this in a lot of different countries, in a lot of different places. So this is, they kind of leave it broad like that and when they're studying this, even though there are specific looks at different religions. Yeah, this is just in a broad general rule. By the way, there's some cool verses. You don't have to write these down. Psalm 34, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord rescues them from them all. And there's an Old Testament passage, Psalm 147, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. And so some people who will point to verses like this that are important to them. This is one of my favorite in the Psalms. You number my wanderings and put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? It's kind of cool to think that God takes our tears and collects them in a bottle. That's a cool little thought. And if he does that, people will find this provides for them the encouragement, the optimism, the hope. So, there you go. Just some thoughts on how maybe religious attendance or spirituality has an influence that researchers are indeed finding correlations. So let's talk about stress. It's the definition of stress, the whole process by which environmental events threaten or challenge us. A lot of the beginnings of the study of stress go to a guy named Hans Selye in 1936 as one of the early researchers. In fact, he used the word stress. The word had been around for a while, but it had a different kind of connotation. And in 1936, Hans Selye used it to refer to something that happened to the rats that he studied. He took rats, and you know what he used to do? In fact, he was trying to find if there was, he was on a kind of quest to study adrenal glands, and ultimately what he wanted to find out was to find a new hormone. So what he did is he found that as he was studying hormonal reactions, he would capture how like an animal would excrete a certain hormone. And so what he did to get him to do that was he injected them, just simply took a compound and injected rats to see what would happen and if they would have this hormonal response, and if so, then he would be able to find this new hormone. And so he did. He took rats and he just simply took and injected them, and they had this response. Ready? They got injected. Their heart rates all of a sudden started to go up. Their respiration rates went up. And he realized, this is it. I inject them with this substance, and it causes their body to respond. Their heart rates went, and they started to increase, and their respiration rates went up, and these other measures, and he was extremely excited until he did what all scientists should do, and he took a control group, and he injected those rats with salt water or saline solution, and what did those rats do? They reacted the exact same way. Their heart rates went up, respiration rates went up, and he realized he didn't discover a new hormone, he discovered the stress response. All rats, whenever you inject them with something or poke them, just like people, they don't like it. And they go, that hurts, and their heart rate goes up and everything else. And he went, and in fact, he thought it was a failure for like 2, 3 days, 4 days, he went, all my work is messed up. The stupid control group, when I inject them with saline solution, they do the same thing. I didn't discover a new hormone. And then it took about a week and he realized, wait a minute, I discovered something different. If you cause people pain or trauma, they all respond in the same way, and he called it the stress response system. And so that stress response system, we give credit to Hans Selye, who went on then and studied, anytime people do this, they have this response system. So I'll talk about Selye. Some common stressors, by the way, that would not just simply poking people with a needle. What would be some common stressors that we would face as humans? Give me some examples of things that you find stressful. You already said you're, what? Too much to do. Busy. Okay? Could be, some say economic stressors could be very, very big for you right now. Lack of money or unpaid bills. Most of you said exams or project deadlines. Maybe you're having to drive in a commute, traffic, for example. Physiological lack of sleep is a common stressor in college students. Unhealthy eating. Psychological, personal relationships we talked about. Conflict and bullying in particular can be major sources of stress. And then social stressors could be things like family conflicts, life events. So, these are just like the needles that Selye poked the rats with. These poke us, and they cause the body to want to respond physiologically. And most of you go like this, all right, I got this deadline, and your heart rate might go up, and you might be thinking about it a lot. Eventually, we calm back down, just like the rats did. But when all of these start to hit, people can start to develop what's called a stress response, and it could get really bad. Oh, that was an old one. So one thing that they tried to do was measure what would happen, and this guy did a cool little study measuring stress while running with the bulls. It was pretty cool. He just simply used they measured different physiological things when he went out and tried to do something that was really fun for him. So let's see if you can hear this. I'll play it. If you can't hear it, we'll try something else.
Pamplona, Spain.
Can you hear it?
The place where danger is sought and survival instincts are put to the test. Every year, during the festival of San Fermin, people come from all over the world to run with the bulls. It's the ultimate adrenaline rush. Since the bull run began, hundreds of people have been horribly gored, and many have lost their lives. Thousands invade Pamplona to experience the sheer thrill of facing death.
Can you guys hear that?
Summer, firefighter Andy is one of them.
At home, I had a lot of friends tell me I'm crazy, but it's something I've always wanted to do ever since I was a teenager, and finally put some money together, and here it is. Hopefully it's the first of many trips to Pamplona.
Andy's agreed to take part in our experiment to see how the body responds at moments of acute danger, like being chased by 6 angry bulls.
Okay, we got a heart rate monitor here. It's gonna go around my torso.
You'll be wired up to a whole variety of medical sensors. First, a heart rate monitor. This will relay information to a special watch he'll wear on his wrist.
It's like it's fluctuating between 104 and 110. That's a little high. I can feel my heart beating in my chest right now. It's a blood pressure cuff. It's gonna go on my left wrist. I'm gonna get a blood pressure reading right now. See how excited I am. About an hour and 15 minutes before the run. Got 159 over 112, so it's a little high already. Finally, I'm going to put a swab in my mouth. It's going to measure the cortisol level. It's a stress hormone.
The body chemical cortisol is closely associated with adrenaline. Adrenaline may save Andy's life, enabling him to run faster than he's ever done before. Now that Andy is rigged and ready, all he has to do is to wait.
I feel excited. It's an hour before the run, and we watched him erect the barriers. I'm ready to go. The possibility of death by a bull it's there, it's real, it's in the back of my mind.
The bulls are released. Andy waits for them to come near. In the tradition of the bull run, the challenge is to get as close to a charging bull as you dare, without getting gored. The bulls are just inches away, and Andy's body is flooded with a massive burst of adrenaline. His cortisol levels more than double. From a normal resting rate of 72 beats per minute, Andy's heart rate rockets, tripling to an amazing 230 beats per minute.
Definitely in fear. You're definitely in fear. You can feel the stomp of the feet, the hooks, and everything. It's wow. It's incredible.
The fear instincts that we rely on to save our lives are immensely powerful. So it's very difficult to turn them off at will.
I thought that was a great example we could all relate to. So, and so in doing that, I figured, well, next time you're running, you just remember that. But what's fascinating is the speed at which your adrenal glands pump out this cortisol in this treatment or during stress, and then the way in which we now our body responds very quickly and very powerfully, and it does this in situations like frustration. You know, if you have some goal that's thwarted and you can't get there and it just gets blocked, well, your body responds much like in that video. That is, you begin to feel certain kinds of things. For some of you, frustration isn't really the key. For some of you, it's maybe conflict. Some of you would say, I'll run with the bulls anytime, that's fine, I mean, I'll get stressed, but I don't like, how many don't like conflict? That's one of the hard things for you. And by the way, conflict is this emotional difficulty that we have of confronting something or wanting to avoid something. And in wanting to avoid hard conversations or wanting to avoid hurting somebody's feelings, we really are faced with a couple of different, what we call a major type of stress that causes your heart rates and your adrenal glands to start pumping out some of this cortisol and other kinds of hormones. So, by the way, different conflicts, sometimes approach conflicts could be those in which you have two good things. You want to approach them both. That is, you want to go to one event at the same time there's another event, and both of these events are what we call fun things, but you can only do one because you just can't get them both in at the same time. And they call that approach conflict. There could be a conflict that you're more familiar with, which is rock in a hard place, right? Avoidance conflict. Like, I don't like that option and I don't like this option and I got to choose one. Or it could be something that has good and bad to it, approach avoidance. But for some people, frustration or conflict or just change. Some of you just don't like change. We talked about the personal life changes. or pressure, demands to behave in a certain way, or expectations. So it's not just, some event that's going to come and end, unfortunately. Many of these are ongoing, and they cause or lead to major types of stress. So let me show you just the rats that were hooked up to these shock generators, and the person who studied it, Hans Selye, in what's called the stress response system. And I'll put this back on, but let's see if we can hear this one.
I have a 3 o'clock call as well.
At her office, corporate attorney Teresa Paul deals with phone calls and emails, deadlines, and meetings.
There is always so much going on here.
If I don't feed children, that's a disaster.
At home, mother of 4 Teresa Paul deals with family meals.
The only thing that we haven't done is mom's coffee.
Children's schedules, clean up the kitchen.
What time do you want me to pick them up?
Drop off the kids, juggle some office emails, and don't forget, the dog needs a walk.
When you know you've got a long list, you just power through.
Our brains are designed to help us power through. Under stress, the brain signals to release hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol. They give us energy, strengthen the immune system, improve reflexes, even help our memory.
What's the percentage of the maintenance?
But if we are always under stress, the release of cortisol begins to work against us.
Chronic stress affects your head, your heart, your liver, your immune system.
McEwen has discovered that chronic stress causes neurons in the brain to shrink and change shape. In animals, that causes a loss of memory, increased anxiety and aggressiveness, and can lead to signs of depression. Other research has shown how chronic stress can speed up aging and make us more prone to disease.
Stress has been shown to affect almost every physiological system we have, and we've now shown that stress even affects cells at the molecular level.
Research has shown that telomeres, the protective coating at the end of chromosomes, gets frayed and worn by stress, mimicking the effects of aging. In a world now filled with cell phones and Blackberries, instant messaging, and expectations of 24/7, our brains can get a stress signal every time an email comes in. Technology is creating new sources of chronic stress.
I actually had one of my partners walk into my office. I looked at him and just said, What now?
Even those who manage stress well can sometimes be overwhelmed. Those who don't manage stress, psychologist Christina Maslach discovered, can reach a breaking point, burnout.
When people are experiencing burnout, they are more likely to make mistakes, make errors. They don't work as well.
But scientists say the brain's resilience can help prevent burnout.
The important thing to remember, though, is when we stop the stress, the neurons will go back to normal size.
The key is to give the brain time without stress, relaxing with family, exercising, eating well, and sometimes, just sometimes, ignoring those emails.
Huh. What they were looking at and what he ultimately found, this thing called the general adaptation syndrome, this is one of the big what kind of commonalities that we all face, and that is our bodies seem to respond to stress pretty similarly, and that is there seems to be a stage, a various stage that we start with, the alarm stage, and we each go through this stage, then a stage of resistance. And this general adaptation syndrome is what Hans Selye really began to explore, is what happens in these rats, the same thing what happens in humans. There's a shock. There's this phase called the alarm reaction. We start to build up a kind of what we call a resistance to stress, and you then go into phase 2, which is this stage of resistance. And up here during this stage of resistance, we spend a lot of time fighting and dealing with the stress. That's where we took measures of people. We find their cortisol levels and everything else are pretty elevated, so their resistance is high. But ultimately, they can go into a stage 3 exhaustion if they're unable to moderate or change that. Now, Some of the ways in which we go through control could be very helpful. That is, I gave you this as an example of some event, we appraise it, isn't stressful. So like those executive rats appraised the light turning on, and they went like this, I can fix this. This isn't a problem. The event, the evaluation, and that's how humans responded. Whenever we gave them some sort of similar kinds of experiments where they would be facing with a stressful event, if they had control, they would oftentimes say, well, yeah, this is stressful, but I'm in control. Even the guy running the bulls didn't find that necessarily, most of the time, a stressful event, because he felt like he was in control most of the time. And that leads to this idea of predictability and control that can help moderate the influence of stress. So predictability then and control are huge. And here was the study using the rats, just to show you what he did. And early on, what they found.
Rat experiments have taught us that changing circumstances alter the impact of stress, and this knowledge has helped many human victims.
This is an experiment illustrating the effects of control in a stressful situation. What you see here are two animals, one able to control a stress stimulus delivered to its tail, whereas the second animal receives exactly the same stress stimulus. This stimulus will occur every 60 seconds unless the animal, you see here in control, rotates the wheel on the front of its apparatus. If it rotates the wheel after the stimulus has occurred, it will terminate the stimulus. This animal, therefore, has control over the stimulus. The animal in the other cage next to it receives exactly the same stress stimulus, except that animal does not have control over it. That animal receives the stimulus at random, depending on the behavior of this animal. And what this experiment is designed to study are the physiological and neurochemical differences that occur in these animals because one has control as opposed to one having no control. And we now have pretty well established that the animal that does not have control over the stressful stimulus is by and large in much greater danger of developing stomach lesions or ulcers than does the animal that's in control. Another very important factor in stress situations is the factor of predictability. The animal that has predictability develops far less pathology and has far less of an adverse reaction, so to speak, than does the animal that cannot predict. The maximally beneficial situation to be in is one in which one not only has an effective coping or control response, but one also has very good predictability. And we can relate that.
Okay. At the end today, what we want to do is just spend some time, kind of debating and talking a little bit about a couple of key issues. There are ways in which stress can be good for us. There are also ways in which it could be very bad. Anybody know if you're how many have ever heard of a type A, type B personality difference? Type A's would be this. Ready? If you can maybe find yourself on this real quick gauge. Some people who kind of lean more towards type A would be very competitive, maybe always on the go or in a hurry, what we call hard driving. You demand perfection, ambitious, want quick promotions, maybe a workaholic even at play. How many kind of lean more towards A? All right. And then type B is a little bit more non-competitive, a little bit more relaxed, in control, maybe a little bit more easygoing, understanding and forgiving, confident and happy in job, enjoys leisure and weekends. How many more type B? So, how many are somewhere in between? It just depends. You're not quite sure. All right. If at the end of the day, if you had to choose somebody, a type A or B to work with, and you had a big project due, who would you choose to work with you, A or a B? How many would choose A's because you're like, okay, they're going to get it done? By the way, A's get a lot of work done, and especially if it calls for a lot of things that need to be done in a time kind of frame. But B's, there are some benefits. B's do some things also. They work better in groups. How about this? In organizations and in business world, who makes it to the top level of executives? Highest level of executives, A's or B's? A's. It's B's. What? B's are almost always at your top of the executive level, mostly because A's probably die off earlier due to, ready? One very big problem with an A. If you're an A, by the way, it's not a problem. Unless you have one other variable, and guess what it is? It's anger or hostility. If you're A and you're angry or hostile or cynical, it leads and is considered one of the number one causes, or not number one, but one of the main causes for heart disease, recognized along with things like smoking and weight, lifestyle choices. So is being a type A if you're hostile or cynical. Otherwise, type A is just fine, but that's why you probably find more type B people at higher levels, simply because, again, they have probably worked better with other people, with groups, and make themselves, I guess, better to handle some of the major stressors, especially without the hostility. Okay, last point. And I'll have you look up the area of psychoneuroimmunology and the role of forgiveness, and we're out of time, so here's what we'll do. I'll cover social psychology next time. If there's any questions on health psych, look at the book and then bring your questions and we'll talk about them next time.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.